Hello, Ashley. You are still there. You are.
We are live. It's a thing. It's happening. I'm always so excited to be back on the Legal Services of Eastern Michigan Legal Lounge with my favorite partner in good trouble,
Katie Stanley here. Yes.
That's you.
You know what occurred to me? What do you do at Legal Services? For folks that don't know, that want to know what you do, what do you do?
Oh, well, what do I do? We, might take a few moments to explain all of that, but I am the Fair Housing and Education Outreach Coordinator for Legal Services of Eastern Michigan. What do you do?
It might take a while to explain that, but I'm a staff attorney at Legal Services, and I work in education and outreach with Ashley, and we're just really excited for our show tonight. Ashley, what do we have lined up here?
We have some fantastic, phenomenal people who are going to appear in front of you in just a moment. Instead of us introducing them, we are going to ask that they introduce themselves. Ooh. And of course, we always want to know, on top of who you are, what is it that you do, and what is one superpower that you have? There they are. Anyone can start. Who are you? What do you do? What's a superpower that you have?
I'll start. Hi, everybody. I'm attorney Kamila Horn. I work for Legal Services of Eastern Michigan here in Flint. And I do consumer law, expungement law, and a little bit of driver's license restoration there. I've been there approximately 2 years. And if I had a superpower, I guess I would say would be tenacity, aka God's strength.
And I will say Kamila has the best decorated office in the entire organization. She has like some skills there, spread and sincere.
That would be a second superpower.
I'll let Vanessa go.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Guerra, and I serve as the Saginaw County Clerk here in Saginaw County. Prior to serving as clerk, I served as the state representative for parts of Saginaw County, and I served there for 6 years and was really able to watch this expungement changes come to be and then finally get passed in the last year of my last term. So I've been very passionate about it. I've had bills in the legislation previously. And so now that I serve as clerk, I still am involved with it because individuals have to get their certified record from our circuit court records office. And so I hope with these changes and the opportunity to help more people, we'll be able to host some more expungement fairs through the clerk's office. I held one as a state rep with legal services late last year. And so it was a really good experience. Of course, because the laws were very outdated. There was not as many people we could help as we would like, but that's changing this April. So looking forward to talking about that tonight.
All right.
And what's one of your superpowers?
I would say, though it doesn't feel like it, I'm a little bit of an Energizer bunny. I always have these bright ideas. I have a board in my office full of them, and they keep me on task, and I add to them probably every day.
I'm Judge Darnell Jackson, Chief Judge of Saginaw County Trial Courts. Been on the bench for 20 years as of February 1st of this year. I was 5 years in district court and last 15 in circuit court. And I'm looking forward to this opportunity to share some information this afternoon and maybe learn some things. One of my superpowers is I sing. I won't be doing that today, but I do sing. So I will reluctantly tell you that because I ain't singing today. All right.
Judge Jackson, you might regret that because I've been tasked with assembling an attorney judge talent show next year. So pin that. I've noted it.
All right.
Put a pin in that. And I guess to get started, just to thank you all for your service and for being here with us and all you do in the community. We're so grateful. And I think before we get this discussion started, though, the purpose today, we really want to make sure folks understand what we're talking about, what their rights are, and what's available to them. So to start us out and explain some of that, Kamila, can you break down for us what even is conviction set aside? What is expungement? What are we talking about when we talk about that?
Well, set aside is a post-conviction request. This is after your conviction through the court system. It's a post-conviction request from a defendant to ask the court to set aside or make non-public their record. It's typically a felony that they're asking for, but there are opportunities in the current law state for misdemeanors and felonies to be expunged also. So basically, it's a person asking the court to make a public record non-public. And by that, I mean that only the police and the court can see it if the person is successful in getting that record expunged or set aside.
And so when we're talking about the conviction set aside law, is there one specific law that we're talking about? And if so, what changes have recently been made? And that's anyone can chime in there.
Well, currently the law allows for the set aside of one felony and up to 2 misdemeanors. That's going to change. Recently, we've been enacted what's known as the Clean Slate legislation. It was signed by Governor Whitmer October 12, 2020. Parts of the bill will take effect April 12th of this year, but other parts won't take effect until October 12th of 2022. Starting April 1st, for example, April 12th rather, a person convicted of one or more criminal offenses, but not more than 3 felonies. Right now, it's only 1 felony. April 12th, it'll be up to 3 felonies, can seek to have that set aside. Also, a person convicted of 1 felony and 1 or more serious misdemeanors can have those set aside if 5 years after their sentencing. Each of these set aside convictions or applications require a certain amount of time before you can even apply for them. Either it's 5 years or 7 years, depending on what the offense is and the number of offenses you seek to have set aside. So right now, the law only allows for 1 felony and up to 2 misdemeanors. April 12th, it would allow for up to 3 felonies and 1 misdemeanor. 4 misdemeanors. And then October of 2022, it'll get into an automatic expungement, which we'll talk about later on. So that's the difference that has just taken place. October 2020, as laws were signed. They go into effect April 12th, 2021.
And might I was just
Sure,
going to say,
go ahead. Yes,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say, in addition to what Judge Jackson says, there also going to be an opportunity to also have misdemeanor traffic offenses set aside also. There are a couple of exclusions to that. An exclusion of operating while intoxicated will not be expungible. And also if you're in a traffic accident that causes death or serious injury, that also will not be expungible. But the rest of the misdemeanor traffic offenses also were added to be considered for expungement also.
And Kamala, that operating while intoxicated is for second offense. First offense can now still be expunged as of December of 2020. So when you talk about intoxication not being able to be expunged, that's if it's the second intoxicated offense, not the first. You can still seek to have that one expunged.
Wait, Judge Jackson, could you clarify, because I'm not an attorney, could you clarify what you just shared?
Well, prior to December of 2020, the expungement bills were not going to apply to operating while intoxicated, whether it's the first offense or second offense. Now, you can apply for operating first offense to be expunged, but not second offense. In addition to what Kamala talked about, serious injury, things of that nature, but operating intoxicated first offense, you can still apply for once these laws take effect.
You guys read my mind. I was just about to ask you what types of offenses can be expunged around traffic offenses and things. So since we've already answered that, I want to roll to our next question. How does, this is kind of a tricky one too. A lot of times folks come to us and they have adult issues, but what about minor offenses? Say, what if your juvenile record? Does that have any bearing? Should they be worried about that? What are some things folks should know about your juvenile record?
Okay. Vanessa, you want to take that?
I think, Judge, I'll probably rely on you to fill in some details, but that was another recent change by the legislature. So prior to last year's legislation, you couldn't even apply until you were 18. And so now the law will say, and I believe this enactment is also in April, but I would have to defer for clarification on that. But now it's a year after whatever your sentence was for that, whatever crime that it was. And then the same applications that apply to the adult conviction would now apply to the juvenile expungement as well. So that was a new change and something that didn't get in until the very end, but obviously grateful to see that pass.
Right. When you talk about juveniles also, automatic expungement will once again kick in 2 years after they've been out of court supervision or until they reach the age of 18, whichever comes first or later.
Right.
And so juveniles can get expunged now as well.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of highlight that a little bit more because that's a huge piece of legislation. Automatic expungement is a thing, I think, only in maybe 2 other states. So we're one of the first states to do this. And as the judge noted, it won't be implemented for 2 more years. So it's different than the paper application process, but still, in 2 years, when we do have this automatic process, it will just really cut out a lot of barriers that exist for folks who have to go through that paper process, because there are still a number of things that need to be done to get your record expunged through the paper application process. And so once we get there to automatic expungement, after 10 years that your felony has existed, it would automatically be taken off your record. That means you wouldn't have to do any other extra steps to follow that process.
10 years, you said? Automatic expungement will kick in?
Yeah, and of course, like all of the expungement legislation, there are certain convictions that it would not apply to, but for most of your lesser felony and misdemeanors, they would apply.
And Clerk, those would be like you're potentially carrying a life sentence, those types of exceptions. Is that what you're referring to? Yes. Okay.
Yes. Now, what is the process now? How does one go about initiating the expungement process?
Well, now you can either get an application from the clerk's office or online, fill it out appropriately, and then pay the filing fee, serve it upon the interested parties who would be the prosecutor or attorney general to allow them a chance to dispute that based upon your record or other things they think are appropriate, get a hearing date from the court and appear in front of a judge such as myself, and it presents your case. And then the judge looks at what you've done since you've been convicted, looks at the nature of your offense and says yes or no. This is a case that I can allow you to have your conviction set aside or not. I will tell you, typically people come in without representation. They file it themselves, come in front of the court and explain what they want to have done, what they've been doing. And unless they've got a number of convictions that prevent that, typically those are granted. Very few have been denied by myself and my other colleagues.
Now, and I would say I would add to that too before we move on, Ashley, is that legal services does assist with expungements. That's why we have Attorney Horn here. She helps with those. And so if folks have questions or if they have some issue with that process or it seems insurmountable, Legal Services of Eastern Michigan is happy to assist with that and help usher through that process and explain some of those barriers that might be there. Ashley.
I was going to ask outside of.
I knew I could tell.
Get out of my head, but don't I love it? I was going to, so outside of Legal Services of Eastern Michigan, so I'll say, Judge Jackson, what stuck out to me is you said that many of the folks who are seeking expungement oftentimes do not have representation. So outside of Legal Services of Eastern Michigan, what support is available to individuals who are seeking expungement?
What I found is that the clerk's office really helps them walk through the application process in many situations. It's not a difficult form to fill out. I mean, and so I think the support will be there when they pick up the application from the clerk's office. They have any questions, they've been more than happy to help them and assist in filling that out.
And then what is the process after expungement? What happens then?
Well, after then,
okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Judge.
We sign an order granting the expungement. We give a copy to the order to the petitioner. We file it also in the county clerk's office, and one is served upon the prosecutor and the attorney general to let them know that the set aside has been granted.
Can you say that one more time, Judge? I'm sorry.
We give an order to the petitioner to say it's been approved. We file one within the court file, and one is also sent to the attorney general or the prosecuting attorney so they know the order has been granted as well. So they send it to 3 people in particular to let them know what happened with that particular petition to set aside.
And then another thing
go ahead.
That we tell folks after they've done the hearing and the order's been set is to also check their iChat record. So this is going to test me. Internet, criminal history, something. It's a public website, but you have to pay $10 to access it. And you want to make sure that you check that, I would say maybe a month or 2 after the order's been given to make sure that it is removed from that public record. Because we have had instances where people did go through the expungement process, they were granted it, and it still was on that record. So there was a miscommunication between the court and the Michigan State Police. So we really recommend that folks check that iChat record. Another thing folks can prepare for is starting to save up some money because there is a cost associated with expungement. So it's $50 you have to send to MSP. There's usually a $10 to $15 charge for fingerprints, and then that $10 charge to check your public record using iChat.
And do you know if there's anyone who maybe has funds for supporting or offer some type of scholarship for someone who could not afford those fees?
Who could that be?
Really?
So I got a really wonderful call from our Attorney General just last week, and she, within her office, she's been a big proponent of this legislation, is planning this year to create not just expungement clinics that folks can go to, but also find ways to establish a fund, recognizing that in and of itself, those costs could certainly be a barrier for folks. So, for example, at our expungement fair we had last year, we were really fortunate that the Saginaw County Sheriff's Office offered to waive the fees for fingerprints, and so that really helped us out a lot. The one fee that's most difficult to get waived is the $50 MSP fee. Because that is for their services. They collect your information. They do their own background check. They reach out to the FBI to do a background check. So there is a cost associated with that. So my hope is that an assistance with the AG's office will be able to possibly get that covered.
That's great. That's great news. So I guess you guys alluded to this a little bit, a few of you answering this earlier, but for folks that are just really unfamiliar with some of the new updates, can one of you tell us what are the offenses that will be automatically expunged and some of the timelines around that? I know we mentioned 10 years for some, and just want to suss that out a little bit for folks, for our viewers.
He muted.
Judge, you're muted, Judge.
Am I still muted?
There we
can
go.
hear you.
Okay. Effective October 12th, 2022, you will have automatic expungements for up to 2 felonies 10 years after the sentence has been served, or the conviction has been entered, I should say, and up to 4 misdemeanors 7 years after the sentence has been served. So that's the timelines for those two classifications. Up to 2 felonies, up to 4 misdemeanors. For felonies, 10 years after conviction. For misdemeanors, 7 years after conviction. That's for automatics. This take place October 12, 2022. And in that time frame, designation, you can list several felonies, several misdemeanors. There are some that you can't get expunged, whether it's automatic or by applying. So it just depends on what that person's record is.
Now, Judge, for the time when you start counting, I know that the previous expungement laws were from the last entry on your record. So the day, say, that you exit parole. Is that still when the time starts counting for folks now, or are there any changes there?
No, there are no changes after probation ends or the sentence ends. 10 years
So that's
after
when
that,
folks can
7
start
years
counting.
after that, 3 years after that for misdemeanors, it just depends. But after that sentence itself ends.
And outside of iChat, are there any other ways for someone to check their criminal record?
So they can come into our circuit court records office. Now, the building is open by appointment only right now, and request their certified record. And they will actually need that as well for the expungement application. And that would be a means to check their record.
And you mentioned earlier, and then Katie, I'm gonna shoot it back to you. Well, not shoot it, patch. That's a violent word. I'll pass it back to you. But you mentioned earlier suggesting that people who do go through the expungement process, that they check to make sure that the expungement actually went through. What if it doesn't go through? What is the process for amendment of their public record or requesting correction of their public record?
So I believe they would have to reach out to MSP. And certainly if they used, if we held, the clerk's office held a fair or something like that, we would help assist them in that follow-up, because we want to make sure we didn't do all of this for nothing. But that would be reaching out to MSP to make sure that they have all of the documentation that they need, including the order, of course, to prove that they were given approval to have it expunged. I don't think it happens a lot, but I do know that it has happened. And so it's just important to make sure that it's off your public record.
And Judge, I just had a clarifying question for you. You talked earlier about the process when folks apply for an expungement, what that looks like, what the process of when the hearing and who were served and those things. Can you say from a judge's perspective, what are you looking at when you're seeing, you said a lot of them are granted, but what are you looking for folks that might be wondering, what should I be trying to show in this hearing, or what should I be substantiating about my circumstances that would make this more likely for me to move forward?
Well, the first criteria is, do they satisfy the statutory requirements in terms of numbers of conviction? Not so much the nature of the conviction, but the number of their previous convictions. It comes into play. So that's the first thing we're looking for, is what are their number of previous convictions, whether it's felonies or misdemeanors. Usually the state police will give us a record from their perspective, the Attorney General, what that person has done with regard to meeting those criteria. After that, we swear the person in, have them testify what they've been doing, what they want to do, why they want to get the expungement. And we try to encourage them along the way and say, you know what, you've done great the last 5 years, whatever. We want to see you continue. If we can help you along that process, we want to do so. So I'm looking for that person coming to me and saying, listen, this has been a real hindrance to me, and I want to help that person remove that hindrance. So I'm looking for something they've been doing since that conviction to say, help me get further in life. So that's what we're looking for. After we meet the legal requirements, I'm looking for that person's motivation, if you will, to improve their life.
That's great. That's a great. I think people wonder and people get so nervous, especially if they haven't maybe been to court. It can be really intimidating, and just to hear from a judge himself what you're looking for and what that might look like, hopefully that alleviates some of that stress for folks around engaging in a system that might feel adverse at times to them. I just wanted to too circle back to one other thing that we talked about, and I know we kind of alluded to this, which convictions can't be set aside, but expressly for people, because we're getting some folks asking, can we just expressly outline what cannot be set aside? And that question is open.
Well, I'll answer that. This the lifetime offenses, something that you're convicted of that carries a lifetime offense. Most CSC or criminal sexual conduct can't be expunged. And that is there's also in the newer legislation, I think they're a little bit more stringent on assaultive crimes and possession of guns, being a little bit more stringent with that. It doesn't mean that people wouldn't qualify for certain convictions, but they're just being more stringent on the assaultive crimes. So you have to be careful with those, and that assaultive crimes would mean like assault and battery, stalking, false imprisonment, things of that nature. So those will be looked at, I guess, with a little bit more scrutiny. Like I said, it doesn't mean that it depends on their record as to whether it'll be expungible or not, because in the new legislation, I believe you can have at least up to 2 assaultive crimes considered for expungement.
And Clerk Guerra, I know you started to give an answer there. Did you have some follow-up to that, or just want to echo?
Nope, I think that was every. Yeah, I was mentioning it's probably easier to say what cannot be automatically expunged, but I believe she covered everything.
And also, felony domestic violence convictions cannot be expunged if you have a previous domestic violence as well. Whether it's automatic, whether it's petition, those cannot be expunged. Period.
Noted. Now, we got a question that asks, what if the court is stating the charge is a misdemeanor, but the MSP is saying it is a felony?
Well, once again, one of them is going to be correct. And you just have to look at what the charge is and what the statutory requirements are as far as it goes. I've never had the situation where there was that conflict in terms of whether it was a misdemeanor or felony. So, I mean, you look at that on a case-by-case basis as well. I've never had that problem. Usually everybody agrees it's a felony or it's a misdemeanor. The only issue becomes, is it more than one felony or is it more than 2 misdemeanors under the current law? And we've had that come before me in terms of people saying, I thought I only had 1 conviction. The record shows you had 2, and then you have to do something else with that particular petition. But as far as whether it's a misdemeanor or whether it's a felony, I've never had anybody disagree on the nature of the offense itself.
I have I think what it might be alluding to, I'm not quite sure if that's a question or not, but sometimes circuit courts have their own high court misdemeanors, which are felonies because they're 2 years or more time. So the circuit court has their own, I guess, word of a misdemeanor, but it's really a felony in law and for expungement purposes if it's something that you can be convicted of a year or more in jail or prison.
Okay, so that would be the 2-year circuit court misdemeanors are, like you said,
Right.
a felony. Right.
Yes.
Now we have another question that asks, someone answered it in the chat, but we'll make sure you all have the same answer. What is the cost to obtain a circuit court record?
Yep.
$10.
Yeah. It's $1. Well, if you get it from our office, it's $1 per page and then $10 to certify it.
Huh.
Which they're not, I mean, they're typically a page.
Yep. So
Thank
Genesee County is, I think, $10.
10. And thank you. Shout out to Matt in the comments, one of our viewers and attorneys who answered that question as well in the comment stream. There's also another question. Why such a long wait for automatic expungement to take effect? And I don't know that you all can have like a definite answer as to why, but maybe you have some intuition as to why potentially.
I think it's just time enough to set up the system to get all of that information together and be able to, disseminate and work and function, into getting those automatic expungements done. It's probably going to take a while to set up the computer system, is my guess.
Yeah.
So,
That is a stated reason. One of the stated reasons, rather, the time that it's going to take to overhaul the system to accommodate that process is going to be a huge process. And so you need time to overhaul the system to get ready for that.
There is another the questions are rolling. People really came to listen to you all today. We feel so fortunate that you're here with us. So can anyone comment on dead docketed cases that may exist on one's record in another state? And I'm not familiar, and maybe it's self-explanatory, but I don't get it. Dead docketed, what does that mean? Are you familiar with the term?
I don't know.
So I think another piece of the question, so I think the gist of what I'm gathering is they want to understand, what if someone has a record or a criminal record out of the state that they're currently residing in and requesting expungement through?
Michigan courts can consider outside another state's records.
Yeah, so
And,
only expunge a Michigan conviction, but in determining whether or not they can do that, they'll look to see if there's a conviction from another state that is similar to a Michigan conviction. So if there is, if it's an assaultive crime, and that's one of the things that prevents you from getting your other conviction expunged, and it's similar enough, then they would count that as preventing you from getting it expunged.
And there is a follow-up, and Katie, I'm just in the comments trying to keep up with
I know. There's a lot of them.
There was a follow-up, and we may have answered it, but I want to word it as it was shared just in case we did not. And this person says, I think the question was what if there is a mistake on iChat if MSP records that do not correlate to the certified record with the county clerk? How can that problem be corrected?
I believe reaching out to Michigan State Police.
Same answer.
Yep. I mean, because the court, we would have the accurate record. And so it would just be that they either did not file it or perhaps misinterpreted it when it was sent back to them. But it would have to be MSP fixing their own system.
Well, and we're getting a few questions about, different counties, different states. Can you guys answer the determination for the number of, say, you can get this many misdemeanors or this many felonies? Are they considering that number as a total of all the states or just in Michigan? That might be what people are asking in a way, I think.
In terms of having cases set aside in Michigan, we're only looking at Michigan convictions. We cannot set aside a conviction in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. We have jurisdiction over convictions in Michigan. If you're talking about looking at those other convictions as an overall picture of what the person is about, you can look at it from that perspective. But as far as the conviction itself, we have no jurisdiction to do anything with that conviction. If it's a Michigan conviction in front of a Michigan judge in the Michigan court, we have jurisdiction to set aside that conviction. I cannot set aside a conviction in another state, nor can a judge in another state set aside a conviction in a Michigan conviction. You can look at it in terms of what the overall picture of that person is who's in front of you, like I talked about before, when they give testimony in front of the court and says, I've been doing this for 5 years, but if they've been committing crimes in another state for 5 years, that doesn't present a good picture for them when they come in front of me to have a Michigan conviction set aside. So hopefully that clarifies the questions you're getting along those lines.
When Judge Jackson was talking about that, it just kind of reminded me of something that we haven't been stated, but maybe it's the obvious that when there is a request for a set aside, you have to go back to the exact court that you had the conviction in, whether it's district court or circuit court. You have to go back to that particular court. So I'm not quite sure if that's clear with everybody. And go ahead.
I was going to mention down that same line, it might be helpful for folks to know that even if it is your conviction is set aside, it is off your public record, but a court later on, if you commit a crime, would still be able to look at that.
Yes.
So they would still be able to base whatever this new sentence is off of previous convictions that had been set aside.
Yeah.
And I just want to circle back for folks. Someone answered what a dead docket is. So maybe we can answer that question now. The definition being that the prosecution has suspended the case indefinitely, but it can be reinstated at any time. So I think what the person was asking, if that's the case, if it's been suspended, is it something that they should or could expunge, or is that something that you've heard of?
I know in Michigan we have deferred prosecution, where there's not a conviction actually entered based upon a guilty plea or whatever, but I'm not sure how a dead docket works. But a deferred prosecution in Michigan means you get a delayed sentence. It doesn't come down as a conviction itself to even be set aside.
And shout out to Matt just for being clutch. We appreciate that. I missed the part about automatic expungement process. Oh, and now something, and this individual is actually one of our community partners, Yashika Ellis. She works with Wellness Services. So just a note, shout out to our community wellness. Shout out to Wellness Services. Thank you for being here. Okay, so I missed the part about the automatic expungement process. Can you please circle back to that?
Once again, effective October 12th, 2022. There will be automatic expungements for up to 2 felonies if it's 10 years after conviction and sentence, and up to 4 misdemeanors if it's 7 years after conviction or sentence. Those take effect, once again, October 12th, 2022. Automatic expungements for those.
Now, and this is for anyone, right? What do you think the community impact of expungement is?
Oh, I think it would be a great community impact for the individuals, because oftentimes they face barriers with employment, they face barriers with schooling and going into the clinical programs and housing, even when they're in their upper generation. I've had, someone 60 plus have a felony from 1963 and had to go into some kind of assisted living, but couldn't live there because he had a felony 40 years ago. So it would allow people the opportunity to move through life and move through the community and add to the community and be an asset to the community, and live their life. And it will be a reflection of a person just like anybody else learning a lesson and recovering from it and contributing positively to the community. So I think it will be a great thing.
Well, just from a public policy perspective, the fact that someone can have their record expunged, like Kamala just indicated, opens so many doors for them that are previously closed. You're talking about being able to get better employment, get better wages, help their families more, qualify for more programs, which is why when someone comes in front of myself or another judge, we look at all that seriously, because we realize that conviction has impacted their lives in so many different ways. They may have paid their debt 20 years ago. They may have been a model citizen since then, and yet they still have this weight around their shoulders that they cannot get rid of. So from a public policy perspective, it makes great sense to have expungements of records in certain situations. And I applaud the legislature and the governor for passing this last year. I think it's wonderful. So.
Yeah.
And just a quick, I want to just put this in there because we do also have a fair housing center, and Kamila mentioned housing, and HUD has issued guidance around this, that there cannot be discriminatory acts based on your criminal record. They take into account the types, the length of time that's passed, but they can't have a blanket policy that says we will not rent to you because you have this criminal record. So if you're encountering that, reach out to us, and our fair housing center can assist you with filing a complaint or investigating that. It looks like we have another question here. If you have one felony but a lot of misdemeanors, and I assume a lot means more than the amount allowed, what can you do? Can you still expunge the felony? I think that might be what he's asking.
I'm looking at my cheat sheet to tell you the answer to that question. If someone wants to answer while I'm looking at it,
Yeah.
that's fine.
So this person would definitely want to wait till April because the current law, of course, is one felony and no more than 2 misdemeanors. And so come April, I would start, and I've had a few folks contact our office about this already. I would start, if you are unable to do it yourself and unable to hire an attorney, sort of checking out legal services. I imagine as it gets closer, if they haven't already, michiganlegalhelp.org will update their website. They have a wealth of information, and it's typically pretty easy to read and understand, even for folks who aren't attorneys. But depending on what your misdemeanors are and your felony, you could very well get all of them expunged. But not
and more specifically, starting April 12th, you can get up to 3 felonies and an unlimited number of misdemeanors expunged if they're appropriate. So April 12th, 2021, the law will change to take care of at least 3 felonies and any number of misdemeanors you may wish to pursue. So I hope that answers that question.
April 12th, that's an important date. It's also my mother's birthday. But we have another question. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to kind of address a little bit, which I don't know if people are asking about, but what I've encountered in expungements in terms of the fines and costs. A lot of times there's fines or costs associated that are unpaid. And from my experience from doing expungements, it's important to pay those fines and costs before you apply for an expungement, because it is part of the sentence, just like anything else that the judge orders you to do. And you should have that paid off in full before you apply for your expungement. I have had judges, been before judges that, will deny an expungement based on you not completing the sentence,
Excellent point.
So I just wanted to bring that up because that's a big deal, especially with
excellent point.
When Judge Jackson said excellent point, that made me think like, oh, that really had to be a really important
Chief Judge says it's important.
So we have another question here. Can licensing boards see expunged records? For example, someone who is trying to get licensed to be a nurse, caregiver, etc. Oh, good question.
I think I'm not sure about nurses, but I think for attorneys, I mean, maybe the other 2 panelists can speak to that.
I'm not sure either. I don't know what would be considered public, non-public, and for what purposes. So that's something that will have to be explored.
Yeah.
I think that would be a question you'd want to ask the actual licensing board, because, for instance, for us, when we all get licensed as attorneys, we have to disclose all those things, even if they've been expunged. We have to disclose all of that and make a character determination whether we should be awarded this license. So it could be something around that where you may have to explain. I would say just reach out to the specific licensing board that you have that question of.
I think they'll specify too. The licensing board would specify, like, if you're applying to be a teacher and get your certification, you likely you would have to admit to setting aside a child abuse conviction. And actually, child abuse conviction, many of them cannot be set aside. So it's a bad example, but it would depend on the licensing board.
Now, oh man.
we got a lot of questions. I'm rolling through them on the chat here. There's a lot of questions.
Can you talk more about what offenses are exempt from the law? Crime of dishonesty. What does that mean and apply to? Aren't all crimes dishonest?
Crimes of dishonesty deal with like embezzlement, fraudulent purposes. Those are crimes of dishonesty, if you will. Yes, all crimes are dishonest to in terms of their inherent nature, but certain crimes such as embezzlement, larceny, things of that nature is what that specifically refers to.
Larceny being theft.
Yes.
Something I did not know prior to law school.
Yes. And embezzlement is basically theft. I mean,
Yeah.
Yes, I could read Ashley's mind, though. I could see that she was about to ask that.
You said larceny, and in my head I heard arson. So I was like, larceny, fire, but that didn't make sense. So thank you for the clarification. Now, is there just anything else that you think would be important to be shared with our viewers surrounding, not embezzlement, pardon me, surrounding expungement in the Clean Slate initiative or conviction set aside?
Well, I think that one of the main things that the law does, in addition to the automatic expungement, is it increases the number of convictions that can be set aside. It increases the number from 1 felony up to 2 felonies in certain situations, up to 3 felonies in certain situations. Whereas in the past, it's always been 1 felony, 2 misdemeanors. So the law expands the number of convictions that can be set aside. Now, depending on a person's individual situation, that number could change. So it's always a case-by-case basis, but at least the law overall expands the number of convictions that can actually be set aside. To me, that is one of the most beneficial parts of this whole Clean Slate legislation. It allows for an expansion of people's opportunities to, in fact, expunge their record. You know, one of the things that's frustrating as a judge, someone comes in front of you. They've had an excellent record since their conviction 5 years ago, except they have 2 felonies and 2 misdemeanors, rather than 1 felony and 2 misdemeanors, and I can't grant that petition. That is so frustrating because that person has demonstrated that they should, in fact, have the opportunity to have their conviction set aside, but the law limits me from doing so. With the new legislation, there's more room now for me to look at their record and say, you've got 3 felonies, they're not violent, they're not things that are abhorrent, if you will. I can still set aside that conviction. So to me, one of the most beneficial parts of the Clean Slate legislation is the number of convictions that can now be set aside.
And we got one more question that I want to make sure we ask, because I think it's a really good one. And Jamie, shout out to Jamie from our Saginaw office.
And Katie, we call each other cousin, but you all didn't know that. Vanessa looked like I feel like she wanted to say something before
she
we
was
went
jumping.
to the last.
Go for it. Yes.
Yeah, so I was going to add, you were asking kind of our final thoughts. Another major piece is I think what Jamie is referring to, we in the legislature, we called it the one bad night bill. So if you have multiple felonies or misdemeanors and they occurred from the same transaction within 24 hours, they must be counted as 1 felony or 1 misdemeanor. There are some exemptions, of course. If it was an assaultive crime, a crime using a dangerous weapon, or a crime with a maximum imprisonment of 10 years, then that one bad night or that same transaction law would not apply to those crimes. But I think this will help a lot of folks because there's a lot of people, maybe who were young, went out with some friends and committed a couple misdemeanors or a couple felonies. It was all within 24 hours, all from the same transaction, and they're relatively minor. You could actually get all of those counted as either 1 felony or 1 misdemeanor and get them expunged.
Right.
That's fantastic. I can't tell you how many times at Legal Aid that we see that, where it's just a lot of charges from one incident and then it makes them ineligible. And it's so frustrating to see folks that really deserve to have those things expunged and move forward with their lives, have those barriers there. So we are just so grateful. I can't even say, gosh, Clerk Guerra, Attorney Horn, Judge Jackson, we are so grateful that you've joined us. We had so much engagement and so many questions. I really feel like the community got a lot of answers here that they might not have had. And Ashley, what do you think? Any last thoughts for our panelists?
Oh goodness, everything that you just said. So much gratitude, so much to actually go back and study on. And I have a tendency to show people my notes, so you know it's real and that I just wasn't looking down the entire time. We just want to, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your beautiful energy. You were engaging, you were informed. And we can only imagine what your day looked like before you got to us, and you were still pleasant, which says a lot. So from us at Legal Services of Eastern Michigan, we thank you. To our viewers, as always, we thank you. You all really showed up and showed out today in the questions. They were phenomenal questions. I really felt as though everyone was engaged. So thank you to each of you out in DigiSpace, in Facebook land, who took the time to join us as well. We hope that you found this information useful. We're always honored and privileged to host you here on the Legal Services of Eastern Michigan Legal Lounge. And we look forward to seeing you during our, or not, well, even if we don't see you, seeing your comments and feeling your digital energy during our next community conversation with Mayor Neely of the city of Flint to occur on March the 2nd of 2021. Thank you so much, beautiful people. Peace and power, and good night.
Good night.